Saturday, November 16, 2019. Buckingham Palace's South Drawing Room. The room Queen Victoria commandeered for the palace's first ball in 1838 has been rearranged for television. 2 chairs, camera lights, and Prince Andrew, Duke of York, settling in opposite Emily Maitlis of BBC Newsnight, about to deliver what he was certain would be a rehabilitation. His opening posture said everything. Arms relaxed, chin slightly elevated. The unhurried ease of a man who hasn't quite grasped what's coming. The person whose entire job was to prevent this moment had already left the building. His name was Jason Stein, a former special advisor to Amber Rudd during her time as Home Secretary, and a former spokesman for Liz Truss, a political communications professional with a Westminster reputation for understanding exactly how stories turn dangerous. Andrew hired him in September 2019, specifically to manage the reputational catastrophe building around his decade-long friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. In his very first meeting with the Duke, Stein made his position clear. Don't do the Newsnight interview. Don't sit unscripted opposite one of the most forensically prepared journalists in British broadcasting and attempt to explain, off the top of your head, a relationship with a convicted sex offender. He proposed a different approach entirely. 2 lengthy print interviews with established journalists, timed carefully to coincide with Andrew's 60th birthday in February 2020. Controlled, prepared, with a positive hook already built in. He also proposed a Falklands veterans' Christmas campaign as a further hook, a period of charitable visibility designed to reframe the public image around something Andrew had actually done, rather than something Andrew was trying to deny. A proper reputation recovery program. Real alternatives, not just an objection. Andrew said emphatically, "No, we shouldn't do Newsnight." Then he did Newsnight. This is the story of a man handed every possible off-ramp and choosing, each time, to accelerate. Not once. Across more than a decade of escalating warnings, from his own staff, from his family, from the institutional machinery of the palace itself, Andrew was told clearly that his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein was going to destroy him. The evidence of how right they were is now complete. By October 2025, his brother, King Charles III, had formally stripped him of every royal title he held. By February 2026, he stood as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, no HRH, no Duke of York, no Prince, arrested on his 66th birthday on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The crisis is no longer unfolding. It landed. To understand why, you have to go back 19 years. Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida in 2008 to soliciting prostitution from a minor under the age of 18. He served 13 months. That conviction was public, documented, and unambiguous. It's the fixed point against which everything that followed must be measured, because every warning Andrew subsequently received was issued against that backdrop. Everyone around him knew what Epstein was. The question was what Andrew would do with that knowledge. In December 2010, he went to New York to see him. The visit wasn't spontaneous. According to emails later released by the U.S. Department of Justice, planning had begun in April 2010, while Epstein was still under house arrest. This wasn't a brief, regrettable social encounter. This was a coordinated, multi-day visit, arranged months in advance, at the home of a convicted sex offender. Andrew stayed at Epstein's $77 million Manhattan townhouse for several days. On December 5th, at approximately 1:40 in the afternoon, a photographer named Jay Donnelly captured the image that would become the defining symbol of the entire scandal. Andrew and Epstein walking together through Central Park, shoulder to shoulder, relaxed, at ease. These weren't the circumstances of a man trying to distance himself from a dangerous friendship. They were the circumstances of a man who didn't believe the friendship required distance. When the Central Park photographs were published in 2011, Their effect inside Buckingham Palace was described by multiple contemporaneous accounts as seismic. They sent what one source called shock waves through the institution and became what another described as a defining symbol of the scandal. The palace had already been issuing what it called stringent defamation warnings to journalists covering the Andrew Epstein relationship. It now found itself in a position where a photograph taken at 1:40 on a winter afternoon in Central Park had made those warnings look absurd. There was also the matter of what Andrew wrote after the photographs appeared. In February 2011, months after the visit, as the photographs were being published and the pressure was mounting, Andrew emailed Epstein, "We are in this together, and we'll have to rise above it." This email, later confirmed by the U.S. Department of Justice's release of Epstein-related files, wasn't the communication of a man who understood the danger he was in. It was the communication of a man who had not yet grasped that the danger was real. He wouldn't understand it on 21st July 2011, when Buckingham Palace announced he was stepping down as UK Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, the role he had held since 2001. BBC News described the departure as ending a controversial time in the role after sustained criticism. The SBS network in Australia was more direct. The departure came 4 months after his links to a sex offender prompted calls for him to quit. A senior royal aide confirmed to Reuters that Andrew accepted he had been unwise to have associated with Epstein since his conviction. That acknowledgement is on the public record from 2011. He knew. The palace knew he knew. He lost a decade-long professional appointment over the photographs, and on Christmas Day 2010, 6 days after the Central Park walk, 5 months before the trade envoy role ended, he'd sent Epstein what emails describe as a homemade family message. The first warning wasn't just verbal. It came with a documented professional consequence. He paid it, and it changed nothing. The years between 2011 and 2019 accumulated further damage with a slow, grinding consistency. In January 2015, Virginia Giuffre, then known by her maiden name Virginia Roberts, filed an affidavit in a U.S. federal court case, publicly and formally alleging that Epstein had trafficked her to Andrew on multiple occasions beginning when she was 17. Her specific allegation was that Epstein paid her $15,000 following an encounter in London in March 2001. Buckingham Palace responded that any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue. The palace issued more defamation warnings. Requests from Giuffre's lawyers for Andrew to provide a statement under oath were returned unanswered. In August 2019, weeks after Epstein's rearrest on federal sex trafficking charges, court documents in the Maxwell defamation case revealed a second set of allegations. A woman named Johanna Sjoberg gave evidence that Andrew had placed his hand on her breast while posing for a photograph at Epstein's mansion. The documents were publicly available. The FBI, which had been investigating Epstein's network, had formally and publicly requested Andrew's cooperation. He had declined to cooperate. None of this was private. All of it was building. Anyone working in proximity to Andrew during these years would have understood the pressure that was accumulating, not as a distant possibility, but as a documented, legally active crisis requiring serious management. That understanding was precisely what Amanda Thirsk had, and it's what makes her decision so striking. Amanda Jane Thirsk had been Andrew's private secretary since 2012. She'd joined his household in 2004 as office controller, responsible for public and private finances, and had served in the royal household for 15 years total. She was awarded the Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order, the LVO. Her commitment to Andrew wasn't professional in the detached sense. It was personal. She was, by every account, completely devoted to him. One palace source described her to the Daily Mail as a force of nature. If Amanda wants something done, it gets done. Her involvement in Andrew's Epstein association ran deeper than her public role suggested. She had separately contacted Epstein's executive assistant, Leslie Groff, to confirm space for both herself and Andrew on visits. Operational coordination that placed her at the center of the logistics of the very friendship that was now threatening to destroy the man she served. She wasn't a peripheral figure who simply failed to intervene. She was embedded in the structure of the problem. For most of 2019, her answer to the BBC's persistent overtures about an interview had been no. Newsnight producer Sam McAllister had been trying to secure an Andrew interview for approximately 3 years. She had consistently failed. Then Jeffrey Epstein died in his jail cell on August 10, 2019, and the calculation shifted. In her book, Scoops, Behind the Scenes of the BBC's Most Shocking Interviews, McAllister describes the death as the event that moved Thirsk from refusal to agreement. With Epstein gone, with no ongoing criminal trial to complicate or distract, Thirsk saw an opportunity. Andrew could step forward, deliver a clear denial, and put the scandal to rest without the competing noise of Epstein's own proceedings. She believed completely that Andrew was innocent. She told McAllister she thought he was a great person and that she wanted everybody to see him the way she saw him. She hoped the interview would give the public a clear and unambiguous denial from the Duke. A source close to Sarah Ferguson told the Daily Telegraph, "This has Amanda Thirsk's hands all over it. Amanda was the one who pushed for it." McAllister, who negotiated the deal directly with Thirsk across many months, later wrote that the relationship between them, honest, sometimes uncomfortable, direct, was the crucial relationship that resulted in this interview happening. She wasn't pursuing the interview against Andrew's wishes. Andrew wanted to fight back. A royal source told the Sunday Times he was frustrated and exasperated by the whole thing, that he believed the public misconceived him as a playboy prince when he was, in fact, teetotal. He thought the only real mistake he'd made was the 2010 visit, and he'd apologized for that. He couldn't understand why the story wouldn't go away. What he needed, at that specific moment, was a professional whose job was to tell him exactly why the interview was a catastrophically bad idea and make the argument stick. He had one. He had hired one specifically for that purpose. And then he replaced that professional's judgment with the judgment of a loyal aide who agreed with him. Jason Stein arrived in September 2019 and assessed the situation with the directness of someone who had watched careers in Westminster end over less. The specific risk he identified was structural. Emily Maitlis wasn't going to let Andrew dictate the terms of the conversation. A 58-minute unscripted interview on national television, permanently recorded, available to every future legal proceeding and journalist for the rest of Andrew's life, while Virginia Giuffre's allegations were in active circulation in court documents, while the FBI had formally requested his cooperation, and while he was reportedly under consideration for a civil lawsuit, wasn't a rehabilitation strategy. It was a liability document with cameras pointed at it. The alternative Stein proposed wasn't just a vague preference for print over television. It was specific. 2 profile interviews timed to the 60th birthday. It was a Falklands veterans' Christmas campaign. It was a focused period of charitable visibility designed to reframe the public image around something Andrew had actually done, rather than something Andrew was trying to deny. It was, in short, the work of a professional who had thought through the problem rather than the impulse of a man who simply wanted to have his say. When Stein made his case in those first weeks, Andrew had reacted with what one account described as an emphatic refusal. "No, we shouldn't do Newsnight." That statement matters enormously. It confirms that Andrew's initial instinct was correct. His first response to the professional advice was to agree with it. Something changed his mind. That something had a name. Over the weeks that Stein and Thirsk were simultaneously advising Andrew, the internal disagreement sharpened. Aides around Andrew reportedly argued about the decision. One aide, per contemporaneous reporting, believed Andrew risked coming across as an entitled idiot. Thirsk continued to push. Andrew, in the end, followed her lead. Palace sources later told the Sunday Times he decided to proceed out of a sense of frustration, a phrase that captures, with accidental precision, the emotional logic of someone choosing to act before they think. By late October or early November, approximately 2 weeks before the broadcast, Stein was gone. He left by mutual consent, in the carefully chosen language of the palace's communications. He later told ITV News, "I made clear in the 2 months before that I disagreed and advised against it. I didn't think it was a good idea." That statement landed after the broadcast. By then, everyone knew he had been right. The departure had registered well beyond Andrew's immediate office. Sources told the Sunday Times that aides to the Queen, as well as to the then Prince of Wales, had regarded the decision to proceed with, in their exact words, incredulity and alarm. One source with connections at the top of the royal household reported that Charles found the project highly misguided, and the timing, with a general election campaign running simultaneously, awful. A palace source concluded already that this will go down as one of the single worst PR moves in recent history. That verdict was delivered before the interview had even aired. Nobody stopped it. The machinery creaked, the professionals signaled their alarm, and the cameras rolled anyway. The interview was recorded at Buckingham Palace on November 14, 2019, 2 days before broadcast. Andrew chose the South Drawing Room, the room in which Queen Victoria held the palace's first ball in 1838. It was, as one observer noted at the time, not the ideal setting for someone seeking to convey humility over entitlement. Andrew didn't appear particularly concerned about the optics of the room. He was reportedly so confident in his performance that, after the cameras stopped, he gave Maitlis and the Newsnight production team a personal tour of the palace. His equerry later told Sam McAllister that the Duke had been wonderful during the interview. His equerry had not watched the same interview the rest of the country was about to watch. Jeffrey alleged that Andrew was with her at the Tramp nightclub in London on the night of March 10, 2001, that she danced with him while he was sweating profusely, and that afterward she was directed to have sex with him at Ghislaine Maxwell's London house. Andrew's rebuttal to the nightclub claim was to offer an alibi from 18 years prior. His exact words? "On that particular day, that we now understand is the date which is the 10th of March, I was at home. I was with the children, and I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon." Maitlis asked why he remembered this so precisely. "Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. A very unusual thing for me to do. I've never been. I've only been to Woking a couple of times, and I remember it weirdly distinctly. As soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that." The alibi was for a specific day nearly 2 decades prior. The precision of the memory, a named restaurant in a named Surrey town, a specific window of the afternoon, struck audiences and legal commentators immediately as implausible. Completely unverifiable at broadcast, and the stated reason for the clarity of the memory, that Woking and its Pizza Express were so unusual for him, made it worse rather than better, positioning an alibi that was already difficult to believe inside a frame that invited ridicule. What almost nobody knew at broadcast was that the BBC had nearly cut this segment. Production staff considered not running the Pizza Express alibi in order to spare Andrew a particularly damaging moment, Andrew specifically requested it remain in the broadcast. He had failed to mention it during the first recording pass and had gone back to include it. The most ridiculed claim in the most disastrous royal interview in modern history survived because Andrew himself insisted on it. Jeffrey had also alleged that Andrew was sweating while dancing with her at Tramp. Andrew's rebuttal to this was medical. His exact words? "There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat. Or, I didn't sweat at the time, and that was, yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and it was almost impossible for me to sweat." The claim operated on two levels simultaneously, neither of them effective. As a medical alibi, it was immediately contested. Doctors speaking to the Times confirmed they didn't believe the explanation, noting that adrenaline release in humans typically causes sweating rather than suppressing it, and describing his causal account as implausible. When Jeffrey's legal team later requested any medical documentation to support the inability to sweat claim, Andrew's lawyers provided none. As an invocation of the Falklands War, the claim positioned Maitlis, and by extension any viewer who doubted it, as questioning the credibility of a combat veteran. Body language expert Judy James later identified the moment Maitlis used the phrase, "just for the record," before pinning Andrew down on specific dates as the turning point. His body language mood of regal authority and superiority changes dramatically to one of wariness and fear. The composure Andrew had projected throughout, the elevated chin, the occasional expression of ironic amusement, the finger gestures suggesting he was conducting the terms of the exchange, broke precisely when Maitlis moved from general territory into specifics. On the photograph, the image of Andrew with his arm around a 17-year-old Virginia Roberts, Ghislaine Maxwell grinning beside them, Andrew said he had absolutely no memory of it being taken. He questioned whether he had ever been upstairs in Maxwell's house, where the picture appeared to have been taken. He suggested that, as a member of the royal family, he was not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection aren't something that I do. Within hours of the broadcast, photographs of Andrew in embraces with various women were circulating widely on social media. On the broader question of why he hadn't noticed the young girls around Epstein, Andrew explained that as a member of the royal family, he was accustomed to members of staff walking around all the time, and hadn't interacted meaningfully with anyone he considered to be in that role. He earlier said his NSPCC connections meant, "I knew what the things were to look for, but I never saw them." When asked about his association with Epstein overall, Andrew said, "The people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn, either by him or because of him, were actually very useful." He described going to New York in 2010 to end the friendship as the honorable and right thing to do, adding, "I admit fully that my judgment was probably colored by my tendency to be too honorable, but that is just the way it's." Throughout the 58-minute exchange, Andrew didn't express remorse for Epstein's victims. He described his friend's criminal behavior as having been conducted in a manner unbecoming. When Maitlis noted that Epstein was a sex offender, Andrew replied, "I'm sorry, I'm being polite. I mean in the sense that he was a sex offender." The Guardian's response was precise, a grotesque mismatch between the Duke of York's language and demeanor and the gravity of the allegations which continue to surround him, between the obtuse self-absorption of a prince and what we know of the appalling sexual exploitation of teenage girls by his friend. Hannah Bardell, MP for Livingston, called the interview sickening, stating that Andrew literally has no remorse or regard for the women abused and clearly does not see the problem with being pals with Epstein. CNN characterized it as a PR nightmare and a national joke. The Guardian reported a top lawyer calling it a catastrophic error. The interview was described across the British press as the worst public relations crisis for the royal family since the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Jason Stein, who had left his post 2 weeks before the cameras rolled, didn't need to say anything more than he already had. The 4 days that followed were a controlled demolition. Controlled not by Andrew, but by the cascade of institutions calculating their own exposure. The Saturday evening broadcast produced Sunday front pages of undisguised horror. By Monday and Tuesday, the institutional responses were arriving in sequence. The University of Huddersfield, of which Andrew had been chancellor, moved to cut ties. KPMG, the accountancy giant and major sponsor of Andrew's entrepreneurial scheme, Pitch at Palace, announced it wouldn't be renewing its sponsorship. Standard Chartered withdrew its support. The Guardian reported on November 20th that a number of businesses, charities, and educational organizations are severing or reconsidering their ties with Prince Andrew, a list that continued to grow through the week. Wednesday, November 20th, 2019, 4 days after the broadcast, Buckingham Palace released Andrew's statement. I have asked Her Majesty if I may step back from public duties for the foreseeable future, and she has given her permission. The same statement included language notably absent from the interview itself. I continue to unequivocally regret my ill-judged association with Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein's victims deserve justice, and I deeply sympathize with every one of them. The sympathy for victims that should have been the centerpiece of the interview arrived in a press release 4 days later. The palace confirmed Andrew was standing down from all 230 of his patronages. The man who entered the South drawing room expecting to fix things had, within a fortnight, lost every public role he possessed. Amanda Thirsk left her post as private secretary in January 2020. 15 years of service ending in what Sky News described as a legal settlement worth tens of thousands of pounds. In May 2020, the Charity Commission launched an investigation into the Prince Andrew Charitable Trust over regulatory issues connected to approximately £350,000 of payments made to Thirsk. Multiple press accounts described her as having been blamed for the interview decision. The framing isn't quite accurate. Andrew made the final call, but the broader point holds. She was the internal advocate who made the decision possible, the gatekeeper who held the gate open. On January 28, 2020, American attorney Jeffrey Berman stated publicly that Andrew had provided zero cooperation to federal prosecutors and the FBI investigating Epstein's network. This, despite Andrew having told Maitlis in the interview that he would be duty-bound to testify under oath if push came to shove. Push had come to shove. He didn't testify. Virginia Giuffre formally filed a civil lawsuit against Andrew in the Southern District of New York on August 9, 2021, alleging battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress. When a federal judge ruled the suit could proceed, Buckingham Palace announced on January 13, 2022, that Andrew's military affiliations and royal patronages were being returned to Queen Elizabeth II, and that he would no longer use the His Royal Highness style in any official capacity. Military titles he had held since his service career ended, patronages accumulated over 3 decades, gone in a single announcement. In February 2022, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre. The amount wasn't officially disclosed. Multiple sources described it as millions of dollars. Andrew made no admission of liability. The lawsuit, filed because of allegations he'd tried to dismiss on national television, was resolved through an undisclosed payment. Emily Maitlis, reflecting publicly on the interview, later said Andrew lied to me. The story didn't end there. It shows no sign of ending. In April 2025, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide. She was 41 years old. Her posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice, was published in October 2025, reiterating her allegations against Andrew in detail. Her family released a statement. Today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. That same month, the U.S. Department of Justice's release of Epstein-related files produced fresh, damaging material. Documents revealed that Andrew had emailed Epstein on February 28, 2011, more than 2 months after the date Andrew had told Maitlis in the interview that he had severed all contact. The email read, "We are in this together and will have to rise above it." Further photographs from the Epstein files showed Andrew at Epstein properties in contexts that generated significant press attention and renewed parliamentary pressure. On October 17, 2025, Andrew announced he was relinquishing his Duke of York title. On October 30th, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles III had initiated the formal process to remove all of Andrew's remaining royal titles, honors, and styles, including the title of Prince and the style of His Royal Highness. He was to be known thereafter as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The palace statement noted, with careful precision, that these steps were deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. He was simultaneously served formal notice to vacate Royal Lodge, the 30-room mansion near Windsor Castle that had been his home. On 2 November 2025, Defense Secretary John Healey confirmed that the government, on advice from King Charles III, was working to strip Andrew of his honorary military title of Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy. On the 19th of February 2026, his 66th birthday, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The charges related to his decade as trade envoy and allegations that he had shared confidential government trade information with Jeffrey Epstein. He was released after questioning. King Charles issued a statement that the law must take its course and that police had his full support. The man who had been Queen Elizabeth II's favorite son, who had flown combat missions as a helicopter pilot in the Falklands, who had represented British business interests globally for a decade, was arrested on his birthday in connection with the same friendship that had cost him everything else. The closing question isn't, what went wrong? The research makes that part simple. What went wrong is that one person saw it all clearly enough to quit over it, 2 weeks before the cameras rolled. Jason Stein had a specific plan. 2 print interviews, his 60th birthday, a Falklands veterans campaign, a positive hook already built in. It wasn't inspired. It wasn't even particularly creative, but it wasn't the Newsnight interview. It didn't involve sitting unscripted opposite Emily Maitlis and explaining for 58 minutes why your friendship with a convicted sex offender had been a net positive, why you had no memory of the woman in the photograph, and why the adrenaline of a war fought 4 decades ago meant you couldn't possibly have been sweating at a nightclub in 2001. Andrew's decision-making at the critical moment came down to a simple choice. He had one person whose job was to disagree with him and one person whose loyalty made her agreeable. He dismissed the disagreement and followed the agreement. That choice wasn't exceptional. It's in fact one of the more common ways that powerful people accelerate their own destruction. Surrounding yourself with people who confirm your instincts is comfortable until the moment it isn't. By that point, the professional who could have helped has already cleared his desk. The November 2019 interview wasn't Andrew's first ignored warning. It was the 4th, or 5th, depending on how you count. The 2008 conviction that didn't change the friendship. The 2010 visit that sent shockwaves through the palace. The trade envoy role that ended in July 2011. The Giuffre allegations filed in court in 2015. The FBI cooperation requests that went unanswered. Each of those had consequences. None of those consequences changed his behavior. The Newsnight interview was simply the one with cameras. Andrew's equerry watched the 58-minute recording inside Buckingham Palace and told Sam McAllister that Andrew had been wonderful. That equerry was watching the same interview as the rest of the country. He saw something different because he worked for Andrew, not for the truth. Stein had already quit. He'd seen what was coming, said so directly, and removed himself from the wreckage before it happened. The one person in Andrew's orbit who wasn't surprised by any of it was the one person who didn't stay around to see it. Subscribe for more stories like this.